Mary Poppins taught us that a spoonful of sugar fixes everything. But behind the smiles, a darker truth emerged. One by one, the cast faced illness, tragedy, and untimely death. Stay with us as we reveal their real names, real ages, and what truly happened to them. Glynis Johns as Mrs. Winifred Banks. Mrs. Winifred Banks, the outspoken suffragette mother in Mary Poppins, was portrayed by Glynis Johns. At 41 years old, she stepped into the role with an air of confidence that masked years of emotional strain. Her performance radiated conviction and wit, anchoring the family's moral transformation. Yet off-screen, her own life was quietly unraveling in ways the audience would never suspect. Born October 5, 1923, in Pretoria, South Africa, Glynis Margaret Payne Johns grew up in a childhood defined by constant relocation and emotional instability. Her father's touring career forced her into a life without roots, leaving her isolated from peers and normal routines. That loneliness hardened into discipline, but also anxiety, as expectations replaced affection. From an early age, success came with pressure rather than comfort. Her career flourished with precision rather than ease. She earned an Academy Award nomination for The Sundowners, 1960, then reached theatrical immortality in A Little Night Music, where Stephen Sondheim wrote "Send in the Clowns" specifically for her, a role that won her a Tony Award. Behind the acclaim, severe migraines, later emphysema, and chronic stage fright repeatedly threatened her health. Her private life was marked by relentless heartbreak. 4 marriages ended in divorce, leaving her increasingly guarded and emotionally exhausted. The devastating death of her son Gareth during cancer treatment reopened lifelong wounds of abandonment and loss. In later reflections, she admitted that love, for her, had become synonymous with disappointment rather than refuge. Sadly, Glynis Johns died on January 4, 2024, at age 100, from natural causes, in assisted living in Los Angeles, passing quietly after a life of hidden battles. Her ashes were transported to Wales, buried beside her father, as "Send in the Clowns" played. With an estimated net worth of $5 million, her wealth never matched the emotional cost of her career. She left behind laughter on screen and an ache that lingered long after the curtain fell. David Tomlinson as Mr. George Banks. Mr. George Banks, the rigid, emotionally distant father in Mary Poppins, was portrayed by David Tomlinson. At 47 years old, he embodied authority, restraint, and quiet transformation. His performance became one of Disney's most enduring portraits of paternal control. Off-screen, however, control was something he had long since lost. Born May 7, 1917, in Henley-on-Thames, England, David Cecil McAllister Tomlinson was raised in a household shaped by discipline and emotional reserve. That upbringing followed him into adulthood, deepened by the psychological toll of serving as a Royal Air Force officer during World War II. War interrupted his career and scarred his inner life. Long after the conflict ended, its weight remained. His professional recognition arrived late but decisively. Disney audiences embraced him again in The Love Bug, 1968, and Bedknobs and Broomsticks, 1971, cementing his image as a gentle authority figure. He was later honored as a Disney legend, a title that celebrated his warmth on screen. Yet behind that warmth was a man who carried grief he rarely spoke of. That grief began with an unimaginable tragedy. His first wife, Mary Lindsay Hitting, died in 1943 in a murder-suicide that also took the lives of her 2 sons, a loss that shattered Tomlinson permanently. Though his second marriage brought stability, depression lingered quietly beneath the surface. He learned to perform joy while privately enduring sorrow. Tragically, David Tomlinson died on June 24, 2000, at age 83, after suffering a stroke. passing peacefully in his sleep in London. He was buried on his estate in Buckinghamshire, far from the spotlight he once commanded. With an estimated net worth of $3 million, his life remained modest compared to his legacy. Jane Darwell, as Bird Woman, the fragile, nearly invisible figure on the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral, was portrayed by Jane Darwell. At 85 years old, she carried the film's most haunting silence like a whisper of mercy amid a world rushing past. It was a small role, but it arrived at the very end of a life already worn thin by time and loss. Born October 15, 1879, in Palmyra, Missouri, Jane Darwell grew up in a rural environment marked by hard labor and limited security. Childhood was defined by work rather than protection, and physical strain followed her early into adulthood. The lack of stability carved a toughness into her character, but it also weakened her health long before fame arrived. Survival shaped her earliest years. Her career eventually spanned more than 100 films, but success came unevenly and often late. She reached her emotional peak as Ma Jode in The Grapes of Wrath, 1940, a role that earned her the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, yet even that triumph did not guarantee comfort. She appeared in classics like Gone with the Wind, 1939, but was repeatedly confined to maternal or background roles. As age narrowed her opportunities, financial strain quietly returned. Darwell's personal life offered little refuge. She never formed a lasting marriage, and loneliness deepened as friends and colleagues passed away one by one. In her final years, she moved into the motion picture country home not as a celebrated legend, but as an aging actress with failing health. Heart disease and physical frailty reduced her world to routine and memory. Sadly, Jane Darwell died on August 13, 1967, at age 87 after suffering a heart attack passing quietly in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles. She was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, without spectacle, without fanfare. Her estimated net worth of $1 million reflected a lifetime of work that never truly paid back its cost. Ed Wynn as Uncle Albert, the laughing man who floated near the ceiling in Mary Poppins, was portrayed by Ed Wynn. At 78 years old, he filled the screen with uncontrollable joy and buoyant absurdity. His laughter lifted everyone around him. What the audience never knew was how much pain that laughter was hiding. Born November 9, 1886, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Isaiah Edwin Leopold grew up in a home torn by conflict and emotional instability. He ran away at 15, drifting through odd jobs and financial uncertainty before finding refuge in performance. Comedy became both armor and escape, shielding wounds that never healed. Even as his name changed to Ed Wynn, the restlessness stayed. His career rose through vaudeville, radio, and television, making him one of America's most recognizable comic voices. He became legendary as the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland, 1951, and later earned acclaim with dramatic turns, including an Academy Award nomination for The Diary of Anne Frank, 1959. He won Emmy and Peabody Awards, yet success arrived hand in hand with addiction. Alcohol dependency and chain smoking slowly dismantled his health and strained every personal bond. Wynn's private life was fractured by loss and regret. 3 marriages ended in divorce, and his relationship with his son, Keenan Wynn, remained tense for years, damaged by his alcoholism and emotional volatility. Moments of reconciliation came late and felt fragile. Tragically, Ed Wynn died on June 19, 1966, at age 79, from esophageal cancer in Beverly Hills, California, after years of physical decline. He was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, beneath a bronze marker that read, "Dear God, thanks, Ed Wynn." With an estimated net worth of $2 million, his fortune was modest compared to the joy he gave the world. Reginald Owen as Admiral Boom. Admiral Boom, the canon-obsessed neighbor in Mary Poppins, 1964, was portrayed by Reginald Owen. At 77 years old, he brought bluster and brittle authority to a character always on the brink of explosion. On screen, he thundered. Off-screen, he was already growing quiet. Born August 5, 1887, in Wheathampstead, England, John Reginald Owen grew up in a respectable middle-class home where expectations weighed heavily. Academic pressure and the demand to succeed shaped a reserved temperament early on. Trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, he learned discipline before comfort. That discipline would carry him through wars, relocations, and long separations from home. His career stretched across more than 80 films, marked by authority and gravitas. He became unforgettable as Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, 1938, and stood firm in wartime drama with Mrs. Miniver, 1942. Hollywood kept him busy, but seldom celebrated him as a star. However, marriage brought little permanence. After divorce and later widowhood, Owen spent long years largely alone, moving between sets and rented rooms. Heart trouble shadowed his later life, and the vigor he projected on screen grew harder to summon. By his final roles, including Bedknobs and Broomsticks, 1971, endurance had replaced ambition. Sadly, Reginald Owen died on November 5, 1972, at age 85, after a heart attack in Boise, Idaho. He was buried at Morris Hill Cemetery, far from the studios that had consumed his life. With an estimated net worth of $1.5 million, his legacy rested not in wealth, but in persistence. Elsa Lanchester as Katie Nana. Katie Nana, the strict yet wounded caretaker in Mary Poppins, was portrayed by Elsa Lanchester. At 62 years old, she infused the role with humor, edged by fatigue. Her exit from the Banks household felt abrupt, almost cruel. It echoed the many departures that had shaped her own life. Born October 28, 1902, in London, Elsa Sullivan Lanchester grew up in a bohemian household scarred by war and poverty. Artistic freedom came with insecurity, and childhood was marked by instability rather than safety. She learned early to perform not just for audiences, but to survive. That tension between creativity and hardship never fully eased. Her face became iconic as the bride in Bride of Frankenstein, 1935, a performance that fused terror and tragedy. Later acclaim followed with roles that earned Academy Award nominations, and decades later, biting wit in Murder by Death, 1976. Yet her career often advanced in the shadow of her husband, Charles Laughton. That marriage endured for decades and wounded her deeply. Laughton's homosexuality and emotional distance created a life of compromise and quiet suffering. After his death in 1962, she carried grief alone, throwing herself back into work while her health declined. Lung disease and later strokes stripped her independence piece by piece. Tragically, Elsa Lanchester died on December 26, 1986, at age 84, from bronchial pneumonia in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles. She was cremated, and for years her remains were believed lost, only to be discovered later interred at Valhalla Memorial Park under her married name. Her estate, valued at about $2 million, required conservatorship near the end. Hermione Baddeley as Ellen, the sharp-tongued maid in Mary Poppins, 1964, was portrayed by Hermione Baddeley. At 58 years old, she entered the film already carrying decades of strain behind her wit. Her scenes were brisk, almost abrasive, cutting through the household like a warning rather than comfort. It was a performance that hinted at exhaustion beneath humor. Born November 13, 1906, in Broseley, England, Hermione Yolanda. Ruby Clinton Baddeley was pushed onto the stage early, shaped by a family that valued performance but demanded resilience. Talent came fast. Freedom did not. Even success never fully silenced the sense of being driven rather than chosen. Her career thrived on intensity. She shocked audiences with an Academy Award nomination for Room at the Top, 1959, a role so brief it became legendary, and earned further acclaim in The Unsinkable Molly Brown, 1964. Awards followed, including a Golden Globe later in television, yet the industry often reduced her to brash caricatures. Behind the bravado, work became both refuge and burden. Baddeley's private life fractured repeatedly. 2 marriages collapsed, one ending in death, the other in emotional ruin. Loss followed loss, and independence became survival rather than choice. Health deteriorated quietly, with strokes eroding her strength while she continued working almost until the end. Sadly, Hermione Baddeley died on August 19, 1986, at age 79, after a series of strokes in Los Angeles. Her remains were returned to the United Kingdom for burial. With an estimated net worth of $1 million, she left behind not comfort, but proof that brilliance can survive relentless pressure, at a cost few ever see. Rita Shaw as Mrs. Brill. Mrs. Brill, the iron-willed cook of the Banks household, was portrayed by Rita Shaw. At 52 years old, she radiated authority and fatigue in equal measure. Every glance suggested a woman who had endured more than she explained. The kitchen was her domain, but it felt like a final station, not a beginning. Born September 13, 1912. In South Paris, Maine, Rita Shaw grew up far from privilege, in rural surroundings with limited opportunity. Education came through persistence rather than access. She worked early, learned discipline late, and carried the blunt realism of survival into every role. Hardness was not an act, it was learned. Her career favored strength over glamour. She became familiar through films like The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, 1966, and Escape to Witch Mountain, 1975, and through relentless television work that kept her employed but rarely celebrated. Casting narrowed her range even as her experience deepened. Longevity replaced recognition. Marriage offered no shelter. After divorcing actor Harry Boland, Shaw lived largely alone, pouring herself into work while heavy smoking eroded her lungs. Emphysema crept in slowly, turning breath into effort and effort into pain. Roles grew fewer as health declined. Sadly, Rita Shaw died on January 8, 1982, at age 69, from emphysema in Encino, California. She left behind an estimated net worth of $800,000, modest for a lifetime of labor. Mrs. Brill's stern silence lingered, proof that endurance can be mistaken for strength, and that some lives burn steadily until there is nothing left to breathe. Matthew Garber as Michael Banks. Michael Banks, the restless, wide-eyed boy at the heart of Mary Poppins, 1964, was portrayed by Matthew Garber. At 8 years old, he carried the emotional spine of the film with a mixture of innocence and quiet defiance. His laughter felt spontaneous, his mischief effortless. Few suspected that the child anchoring Disney's magic would live one of its most tragic off-screen stories. Born March 25, 1956 in Stepney, London, Matthew Adam Garber grew up surrounded by performance, discovered almost by accident, and propelled into global fame before he could understand its weight. Early success brought expectations rather than protection. The pressure of recognition followed him through school years meant for anonymity. Childhood slipped away quickly, replaced by scrutiny and constant comparison. His career was brief but luminous. After The 3 Lives of Thomasina, 1963, Mary Poppins made him world famous, and The Gnome Mobile, 1967, closed his acting chapter almost as suddenly as it began. Opportunities faded as he stepped away from acting, choosing a quieter life outside the spotlight. In his late teens, tragedy arrived without warning. A trip to India in 1976 exposed him to hepatitis, an illness that silently advanced. By the time he returned to England, the infection had spread to his pancreas, leaving doctors little chance to intervene. Finally, Matthew Garber died on June 13, 1977, at age 21, from hemorrhagic necrotizing pancreatitis at the Royal Free Hospital in London. He was cremated at St. Marylebone Crematorium. With an estimated net worth of $500,000, his legacy rests not in wealth, but in a childhood performance frozen forever in time. In 2004, Disney named him a Disney legend, a title that arrived long after the boy himself had vanished. Arthur Malet as Mr. Dawes, Jr. Mr. Dawes, Jr., the frail, giggling old banker, was portrayed by Arthur Malet. At 37 years old, he convincingly embodied old age, his body folding into a character decades beyond his years. The performance was comic on the surface, but strangely melancholic beneath. It marked a turning point in a career defined by transformation. Born September 24, 1927, in Lea-on-the-Solent, England, Vivian Arthur Rivers. Malet came from privilege, but not comfort. Emigrating to the United States as a young man, he faced the loneliness of reinvention. Accents, identity, even his name were reshaped to survive in a new country. Belonging always felt provisional. His career flourished in character roles rather than stardom. He stood out in films like The Adventures of Bullwhip Griffin, 1967, and later Bedknobs and Broomsticks, 1971, often playing men far older than himself. Though respected, personal life offered little anchoring. A failed marriage ended in divorce, followed by decades of relative solitude. Malet lived quietly, moving from role to role, television set to soundstage, building a resume without building a home. Aging crept in unnoticed, much like it had in his characters. Arthur Malet died on May 18, 2013, at age 85, from natural causes in Santa Monica, California. There were no dramatic headlines, no public farewell. With an estimated net worth of $1 million, his life closed as it had often unfolded, useful, dignified, and quietly overlooked. Marjorie Bennett as Miss Lark. Miss Lark, the sharp-voiced neighbor clutching her pampered dog in Mary Poppins, 1964, was portrayed by Marjorie Bennett. At 68 years old, she stepped into the film as a woman already hardened by time. Her brief appearance carried irritation, fragility, and a quiet loneliness beneath the comedy. It was a small role that arrived after a lifetime spent circling the edges of fame. Born January 15, 1896, in York, Western Australia, Marjorie Bennett grew up amid migration and instability, eventually moving to the United States in search of survival rather than dreams. Poverty followed her early years, and certainty never came easily. Acting began young, but success stalled repeatedly, forcing her to rebuild her career more than once. Her career stretched across decades and continents, yet recognition remained elusive. She appeared in films like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, 1962, and later Charlie Varick, 1973, often cast as sharp-tongued, aging women who reflected her own endurance. Television kept her visible, but rarely celebrated. Work was constant. Her personal life was marked by loss. Her marriage ended in separation, and the death of her son left a grief she carried quietly. Illness followed, with cancer slowly weakening her body while she continued working until health forced retirement. Independence became isolation. Sadly, Marjorie Bennett died on June 14, 1982, at age 86, from cancer in Hollywood, Los Angeles. Her ashes were placed in the Columbarium of Dawn at Forest Lawn Memorial Park. With an estimated net worth of $700,000, she left behind a career built on persistence rather than reward. Cyril Delevanti as Mr. Grubbs. Mr. Grubbs, the elderly bank clerk moving quietly through Mary Poppins, 1964, was portrayed by Cyril Delevanti. At 75 years old, he embodied frailty with unsettling authenticity. His presence felt subdued, almost ghost-like, as if already fading from the world around him. It was a role shaped by a lifetime of vanishing into the background. Born February 23, 1889 in London, Harry Cyril Delevanti was raised in an artistic household shadowed by war and displacement. Music and performance surrounded him, but stability did not. World conflict disrupted his early years, and adulthood arrived carrying uncertainty rather than promise. Migration to the United States brought opportunity, but also permanent distance from home. His career unfolded quietly but relentlessly. He appeared in classics like Limelight, 1952, and decades later in Soylent Green, 1973, often uncredited, often unnoticed. Television filled the gaps, with countless guest roles that kept him working but anonymous. Recognition came late, and briefly, never enough to erase decades of obscurity. Personal life offered brief warmth and long grief. After losing his wife, Delevanti lived his final years surrounded more by memories than people. Lung cancer took hold as work slowed, draining both strength and voice. Loss compounded loss, leaving little comfort at the end. Cyril Delevanti died on December 13, 1975, at age 86, from lung cancer in Hollywood. He was survived briefly by his children, one of whom would also pass away soon after. With an estimated net worth of $600,000, his legacy rests in the hundreds of roles few remember, but many have seen. Julie Andrews as Mary Poppins. When Julie Andrews stepped onto the screen as Mary Poppins in 1964, she was 29 years old and instantly immortal. The calm smile, the iron discipline hidden beneath warmth, and the voice that seemed almost unreal made her the emotional anchor of the film. Yet behind that perfection stood a woman shaped by childhood trauma. Born on October 1, 1935, in Walton-on-Thames, England, Julie grew up in a fractured wartime household marked by divorce, instability, and abuse. Her extraordinary voice became both her escape and her burden, forcing her into adult responsibility while still a child. By the time she reached Broadway, she was already exhausted, but unstoppable. Mary Poppins brought her an Academy Award, followed immediately by The Sound of Music, 1965, cementing her as the face of hope in a shaken post-war world. Her career soared through triumphs like Victor Victoria, 1982, but fate intervened cruelly. A 1997 vocal cord surgery permanently damaged her singing voice, a devastating loss for someone defined by music. Personal pain followed, a divorce from Tony Walton, and later, the deep grief of losing her soulmate, director Blake Edwards, in 2010. Now, at 91 years old, Julie Andrews remains a living legend, active through narration, Bridgerton, writing, and mentorship. With an estimated net worth of $30 million, her true wealth lies in resilience. Mary Poppins wasn't an act. It was survival, perfected. Dick Van Dyke as Bert. When Dick Van Dyke danced across rooftops as Bert in Mary Poppins, 1964, he was 39 years old and hiding pain behind joy. His elastic movements and infectious grin made him unforgettable. What audiences didn't see was a man battling inner darkness while projecting happiness to the world. Born December 13, 1925, in West Plains, Missouri, Van Dyke grew up poor, served during World War II, and carried physical and emotional scars into adulthood. Fame arrived with The Dick Van Dyke Show, earning him 3 Emmys, but success fueled alcoholism that quietly consumed him for decades. By the 1970s, he admitted he had been drinking for 25 years. Despite setbacks, he endured. Films like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, 1968, and later Diagnosis, Murder gave him second and third acts few performers ever receive. Loss followed him too, divorce, guilt, and the death of loved ones, but he chose motion over bitterness. In 2026, Dick Van Dyke is 101 years old, still inspiring. Honored as the oldest Emmy winner in history, 2024, with a net worth near $50 million, his legacy isn't wealth, it's defiance. Bert's joy was real, but it was earned the hard way. They floated into our lives on laughter, music, and magic, but time, quietly and without mercy, took them away one by one. So now we ask you, which loss from the Mary Poppins cast moved you the most? And which story shocked you when you learned the truth behind it? If these memories stirred something in you, like the video, subscribe and share, because as long as we remember them, their magic never truly disappears.